Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome back to the Pink and Channels. We're live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter/X for this little bit of a transfer window debrief. Look ahead to tomorrow's massive game against Coventry City in the Championship as well at Carrow Road. Plenty to get through. We, of course, want your comments, your questions, your reflections on the window that's been pretty frantic. Well, maybe not a frantic transfer window, but definitely a frantic last half an hour of the transfer window for Norwich City. 3 deals completed in the space of 20 minutes last night. They were, of course, Adamida joining Celtic on loan for the rest of the season, Przemysław Pocheta joining Swansea in a permanent deal, and then an incoming as well, Norwich City signing Sydney van Hooijdonk, as he has very kindly provided a pronunciation guide on Norwich City's channels this morning. And I've got to get used to saying that. Van Hooijdonk. There we go. So we're going to start really. I'm joined by Samuel Seaman. I'm going to ask him the very same question in just a moment. But wherever you're watching, I want first and foremost your feelings on the transfer window. So maybe two questions, really. What grade would you give Norwich City's January transfer window, first and foremost? And then feel free to expand. That's how I'm gonna go for it. So let's of course, we're not doing any of this numbers stuff that they do now with grades. We're going purely from A star down to whatever the lowest one is. Thankfully I wasn't down there, so I'm not quite. What is it? F? Is F maybe the lowest? We'll go F and we'll go for that range. So let us know what you think and your reflections as well. So Sam Seaman, I've given you enough thinking time there. Let's start with your grade for Norwich City's January transfer window activity, and then a little bit of explanation, show your working as to how you've ended up at that grade.
Yeah, so coming back to GCSEs, talking about the numbered grades and the show you're working, I'm right back in there. But yeah, I think overall I'd probably give it a C minus. I think in January it's always hard to expect loads and loads of business just because of the sort of nature of the market and how expensive it can be, the little time frame that you have to do it, and the fact that games are going on, players are getting injured, everything's sort of in flux in January. It was always going to be hard to sort of bring in 5 or 6 players for Norwich. But I think given the amount of time that Ben Napper had to sort of dissect things at the club and make his sort of assessments as to what needed to be done, I felt that in the lead up they maybe could have done a little bit more preparation than they did. We basically saw no movement really whatsoever about sort of incomings until sort of the final third of the window, at least, definitely the second half in terms of Jonathan Varane. Obviously that didn't end up happening, and then Van Hooijdonk, as you so eloquently pronounced, was I think probably an upgrade. I've been quite critical of Adamida so far this season, and I think although a lot of people will talk about the mismanagement that there's been and the lack of opportunities that he's been afforded, the failure to send him out on loan when maybe earlier in his career that might have given him the opportunity to get some minutes and develop, I still think that he personally could have been better performance-wise and wasn't really doing enough to secure his sort of starting berth. So I feel that in the striker area, they've maybe upgraded just based on, obviously I've not seen too much of Van Hooijdonk, but I've seen, a lot of clips and a lot of goals. And if you just look at his statistics in the sort of leagues that he's operated in, it definitely suggests that there's a man with pedigree there. So in the striking department, it's quite hard to offer anything but a positive assessment on the window. But I wouldn't have said going into it that was the department that needed the most work. There was also sort of the talk of maybe starting this rebuilding process, and as I said, in January it's always hard to expect loads of that to go on, but I don't feel that they're much further ahead in the sort of Napper project, if that's the right term for it, than they were at the start of the window. So although I think there were some positive steps, getting sort of Forshaw and Hwang off the books, in my view, were both positive steps towards sort of lowering the age profile and things like that. I think a lot of Norwich fans were expecting more and were hoping for more. So, yeah, I think they've done okay. They probably rescued a little bit of it on the final day. If those deals hadn't been done, I probably would have been looking at it very negatively indeed. But yeah, definitely room for improvement in terms of. I felt they could have been a bit more proactive earlier in the window and tried to do more. But yeah, I don't know. How about you?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to place it any higher than a C, really, isn't it? I think just in terms of what you said there, but I think also contextually, it's clearly been, and I think we've seen this in general. I think I read last night that it's certainly in terms of Premier League clubs, it's the lowest spending transfer window for a good couple of years now, and there's obviously clubs up at that level who are worried about financial fair play, and at Championship level as well. By the way, I know Kieran McKenna at Ipswich has spoken about it, and so have others as well. So I think all of that, and January is as well notoriously quite a treacherous market. And you know, I dare I mention his name, but Stuart Webber always used to speak about how January is not the place really to go and do business, particularly for the long term. So sometimes if you're not convinced that you can do the business that you need to do, doing no business is not a bad way to go about it. And like you said, I think there have been some objectives that have been achieved. They've clearly managed to get a few players out, which is good, ahead of what I think we all expect to be, whether it will be or not, but certainly what we all hope will be, I think, a relatively big change or summer for change at Norwich City. So the deal to obviously sort of not have to pay Adam Forshaw's wages for the next 6 months is good. The business not to pay Shemiswaf Boeta's wages for the next 4 months is good. Hwang, as you mentioned, I think the fact that he returned is good as well, and the fact they've managed to get Adam Eder, who wasn't cheap by all accounts, in terms of his wages either. They're able to get some of that off the books as well. Obviously, they've brought in Van Hooijdonk, so not quite sure of kind of the exchange there of wages. But what was interesting for me, and I think we'll come on to Van Hooijdonk in specifics at the moment, and I think this was the theme whenever you spoke to anyone throughout the window, the word long term came up, and we heard it as well in terms of Jonathan Varane when we spoke to people around that interest. He's a player for the mid to long term. Van Hooijdonk, you will have seen in Ben Napper's quotes on Norwich City's website last night, which you can read at pinken.com. He spoke about him being a target for the long term. And it's interesting because if you look at his sort of data profile, he's not a massive player in terms of pressing or in turnovers, which I think we would usually kind of associate with a David Wagner style player, which is exactly why they brought in Hwang in the summer, because he did kind of hit some of those data points. He looks to me more of a sort of penalty box striker. There's a lot of really good data around kind of his work in and around the penalty area. Outside of it, not so much, but so I think the dynamic is interesting, and the shift clearly towards something different, something new is interesting as well. And it feels like, from what Van Hooijdonk said in his interview and what from Ben Napper said in those quotes, that we are seeing a shift in that. So I think it is maybe the first step, is how I would maybe reflect on this transfer window. Not the biggest of steps, it's not Neil Armstrong levels on the moon steps, but they've definitely taken a step, and it will be interesting, I think, to hear after Saturday's game David Wagner's reflections on it. But I think, to me, it is the signal that change is afoot. How big that change is and what it looks like, we shall see. But this feels like the first step of it. Let's come to Reese in the comments, who has graded it as a C. He said, cleared some dead wood. Eder got the loan he needed, and we have what looks like a half decent striker come in who wants in for the long term, refused to overpay for a defensive midfielder too, and that's interesting. Indeed, we'll come back to Dan's comment on Van Hooijdonk as well. But of course, any comments or questions that you have, you can get them in. We're asking for your grades and your reflections on Norwich City's January transfer window business. Any other questions, any other business, you're more than welcome to chuck in as well, and we'll come through to them later in the show. Sam, let's zone in on Van Hooijdonk then. I mean, you did a brilliant profile piece on him last night. From that, kind of, what did you discover about his journey, his footballing journey, and the type of player that Norwich City have recruited as well?
Yes, just goals really is what you get from sort of the early parts of his career. Like you said, I think there was a video doing the rounds of his sort of goals at Heerenveen, which was the last club where he really got the chance to show what he was about. And it is just clever movement and picking up goals that way, which is a really interesting sort of way of scoring goals for somebody of his profile. If you just looked at the very baseline data in terms of his height and things like that, you think, okay, here he is coming to play the Josh Sargent role in terms of his his physicality and maybe holding the ball up, but he's adapted his game to almost completely ignore some of those natural strengths that he might have come across, and he's a bit of a poacher really. If the ball drops in the box, he's probably there to finish it off. And I find it interesting that actually he comes in as the replacement for Adam Eder, because I'd say amongst probably a lot of weaknesses that have let him down at Carrow Road, that is one thing you can say about Eder, is that if the ball drops anywhere that isn't a player's feet in the box in the last 5 minutes, Adam Eder is the most likely player to meet it. And I think Van Hooijdonk sort of fits that profile as well. But just throughout his career, really, from when he came through the academy at sort of his local club to then moving to Heerenveen for 18 months on loan, he was just scoring goals. He started off in the Eerste Divisie, which is the Dutch second division, scored plenty of goals there. That's what earned him the move to Bologna when he was, I think, 21, then went to Heerenveen and scored 19 goals last season, bearing in mind they play in the Eredivisie, which, you know, isn't sort of top 5 leagues, but it's definitely in that second echelon of top tier leagues in Europe. And to be honest, I was actually surprised that Norwich and any championship club, really, especially ones that aren't right in the promotion mix in terms of automatics in the top 2, I was surprised that a club in that position were actually able to pick him up. You would have thought, although things haven't gone for him at Bologna, really, that he might have been able to get some lower Premier League interest, or at least some interest from one of the other top 5 leagues in Europe. Really, there was sort of links with Nottingham Forest and Celtic in the summer, and then there was just this strange sort of separation between him and the Bologna manager, Thiago Motta, whose name I'm sure a lot of people will recognise. There was this Spanish pre-season camp, and it all seemed to kick off a little bit from nowhere because he came back from Heerenveen. I'm sure he was actually pretty sure he might get a decent chance. He was behind Joshua Zirkzee, who's also sort of made a bit of a name for himself in Europe.
Yeah, he's been linked with Manchester United and various clubs, hasn't he?
Yeah, so he did have sort of some serious competition. But when you score that number of goals in the Eredivisie and you're coming to a Serie A club that, you know, they aren't, I don't think, you know, struggling too much, but they're not an especially big club. They're sort of one of your also rans in the Serie A. I think if you were him, you'd have expected to at least have a decent chance. But they went on this pre-season camp. Mossa didn't even take him on the camp. And then Van Hooijdonk's dad, who I'm sure a lot of people will know from his time at Nottingham Forest and Celtic and Feyenoord, had a pretty decent goal scoring record as well. He hit out against that, and it all just seemed to be quite a lot of controversy from nowhere, really. So it's quite hard to put a finger on where that's come from, especially given there's not been any sort of reports about any attitude issues with the player or anything like that. But basically from that point onwards, it was clear he wasn't going to play a major role in that team. And although he hasn't been completely separated from the group, sort of Josip Drmic style, he has played maybe your Dennis Srbeny role in terms of, I think he's played 9 games in the Serie A this season, started twice, not scored any goals in the league, scored once in the cup. So the last sort of few months and the start of this season have been quite a puzzling time compared to the rest of his career. But I would say that Norwich fans should probably look actually at the period before that and say that if you look at the Eredivisie, it's probably a higher quality league than the Championship. There are definitely some teams that would be way better than the teams sort of in the Championship, and he has scored a lot of goals at that level. So throughout his career, apart from these sort of confusing months, I think it's definitely a bit of a coup for Norwich, actually. And Napper's quotes, as you said, they're available to read on pinken.com, and I think they did sort of suggest that they were actually pretty pleased to have a player of this caliber, and it is pretty exciting, especially given he looks like he's in it for the long haul.
Yeah, and just a point to pick up on in terms of relation to tomorrow, I think there's a lot of hope that he'll be involved tomorrow, but Norwich still waiting on some clearance, as I understand it. So we need to obviously receive that in time to be eligible to play. We'll try and bring you an update on that a little bit later if we can. But I mean, you mentioned his goal scoring record, and you're right in terms of Dutch football. It's excellent. It's 22 goals in 58 games in the Eredivisie. It's 21 in 53 at the next level down. So I mean, he's someone who has scored goals quite consistently in his home country. And I remember speaking to someone a while ago about Dutch football in terms of players coming over, and it might have been in relation to Van Wolfswinkel actually, and how it can sometimes be a little bit of a lottery. So you can do loads of work on a Dutch player who's played in the Eredivisie, and you bring them over and they just kind of take to it like a duck to water. And sometimes you kind of have the Ricky Van Wolfswinkel element where perhaps they really struggle, and there's a physicality element as well. So that's interesting. Of course, I know a lot of people are speaking about his Bologna record, which I think you've put in context really well actually when you've spoken about it. But you look at his Heerenveen record last season. I mean, 19 goals in in 39 games. It's a tremendous return at that level, and as Dan points out, when I put his response to us up in a moment, it kind of similar levels to what Cody Gakpo was producing before he joined Liverpool. I found this entry interesting. There's a good thread on Twitter from a Norwich fan called Bethnal Yellow and Green on him. I'll try and bring that down, so hopefully you can see that a little bit more. This is his shot maps of goals in the Eredivisie, actually, and you can see. So the blue ones are shots. The ball symbols are goals, just to clarify that data point. You can see where all of his goals are coming from, Sam. I mean, it's inside the area. It's from relative close range. I mean, he described himself in his first club interview as a goal scorer. I mean, there's nothing quite more graphic than that to really illustrate the type of striker he is. One that's in the box, that is capable of really scoring goals. And if, of course, the supply lines are there and he receives the ball in the right areas.
Well, that's the thing, right? Like, yes, as I said, you look at him and physically he feels like he might be a sort of counter-attacking, more direct sort of player, but you don't score goals like that necessarily on the counter. I don't think too many chances, emerge from that sort of 2-3 yard range if all you're doing is looking to finish off counter attacks and use your sort of physicality and pace to get into those positions. So it's probably true that the way to get the best out of Van Hooijdonk is actually a sort of possession based style of play, and he does look very different to Teemu Pukki. But I'm sure if you put Pukki's 29 goals in that famous championship season on a graphic like that one, it wouldn't look too different. So yeah, I think contrary to maybe how Norwich are playing at the moment, he will thrive off service that's being provided from close to him, from persistent possession in and around the box, and that's the sort of step that's being taken, hopefully, towards a future where there's a slightly more exciting, more possession-based style of football. Maybe that's one that Ben Napper has suggested might be one that he's more happy to go to. And I know he's voiced that in terms of control, and we're always quick to point out that yes, control, possession isn't the only way to have control in a game, but I think it is probably the easiest and most obvious way to get control in a game. So I'd suggest he'd probably actually suit that sort of system a little bit better. I suppose in some senses it's a bit of a compromise, because at that sort of height and with the way that he has scored goals, to be fair, at times with sort of his head and things, you'd say that he might be able to suit a Wagner system a little bit. But for Football Manager fans, I hope this sort of this analogy makes sense to those who aren't fans. But it feels like his whole green circle is as a sort of a striker in sustained possession, and then sort of he's got 3/4 of one for a team that's counter-attacking, and he's being maybe slightly more direct. So in that sense, I feel like it's a little bit of a compromise, a bridge between that possession-based style and Wagner's style. I think he is, as I said, still pretty good in the air. So in terms of crosses, he probably would thrive on that. But I don't see the evidence of him sort of making runs in behind and running long distances with the ball that suggests that he could spring forward on the counter-attack from the halfway line and score goals that way. So it is definitely going to be interesting to see how he fits into this team, certainly until the end of the season, because although there is an option, I think if he scores no goals between now and the end of the season, it's going to be difficult for them to justify, given the tight finances, sort of taking advantage of that option. So you'd presume for now he is going to have to fit into that maybe more defensive, more direct, more counter-attacking based approach. And it will be interesting to see how he adapts to that and how they adapt to him in the meantime. But when you sort of consider all the strikers in the mix with Barnes and Sargent and how good they've looked together, it's all adding up to actually quite a lot of questions. And I think that's the exciting thing about this signing, if you're looking at it from a glass half full perspective, is that hopefully we're going to get some of those answers, and I'm interested to see what those answers look like on the pitch. I suppose if you're looking at it glass half empty, you could say you maybe don't want too many questions when you sign a player, and you want somebody to immediately show why they have been signed and why they could fit into that team. But I don't think that's necessarily the situation we're in here, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays out, really.
Yeah, well, let's flash up Dan's comment just to kind of close the circle on this conversation. He says, really impressed with Norwich getting Sydney van Hooijdonk. I'm a big Utrecht fan and watch a lot of Dutch football. He was really great in the 22-23 season. He was on par with Cody Gakpo before he left, and he left for a certain team called Liverpool. So we'll certainly take that. But it does feel like he's going to be someone that needs a supply line and a consistent supply line built for him. And we could, have an hour-long debate about whether that's the case at Norwich City, but they do create opportunities. Whether they create the type of opportunities that he will need to score goals, we shall see. In terms of your transfer window reflections, John Barton has gone nice and strong with an A. They kept John Rowe, Gabriel Sara, etc., and got a good striker to play with Josh Sargent. Docker Paul has said Van Hooijdonk may be a good asset to hit the ground running, and let's hope so. We're obviously waiting and seeing whether Norwich City will reach that or receive the clearance that they need for him to be eligible for tomorrow's game against Coventry, which we'll come on to in just a moment. And I don't know if we read this one out. I don't think we did. UK Adventures in Orlando, which sounds absolutely glorious. Also a grade C. Really excited by SVH and glad to see PP and AF go. Hope for a defensive midfielder, but glad we haven't overpaid, hoping for plenty more in the summer. Let's just pick up that strand on a defensive midfielder, Sam, because Jonathan Varane is the name and the one that they were in for, certainly in the second half of the window, and pushed hard to get. I think they were pushing against a closed door for a lot of it. Sporting Gijón very adamant that they weren't going to sell him. There was negotiations with his representatives. There was bids made by all accounts. Wasn't one that they were able to get over the line for now. But again, just to reiterate, everything that Ben Napper seems to have tried to do in this January window is geared towards the mid and long term. Do you get the sense there that that's a player and a deal that Norwich City will look to try and ignite again in the summer?
Yeah, I think that's the good news, really, and probably the reason why sort of the club avoided levels of criticism over their failure to get that player. As you said, Gijón were sort of playing hardball a little bit. He had a release clause that was reportedly between sort of €6 million and €10 million. It sounds like the latter, maybe the truth was based in the latter towards the end, and Norwich just don't have the funds really to pay for that. But Gijón are a team currently pushing for promotion. He's not really in the team, but you can probably understand why they want that cover in the building and why they just want that assurance when they're in such a good position to try and help get them over the line. But I think as we've sort of discussed on and off camera already, really, once you get promoted, you then have the chance to sort of assess things. They'll probably have the chance to sign another defensive midfielder, and they might look at Varane and say, okay, he's barely played any minutes in sort of second division football, and realise he's not going to help them much in the top flight, and that's when the door might open for Norwich. But as you said, it was always sort of a mid to long term target. I don't think they'll feel that they've lost much in terms of the rest of this season by failing to get Varane. The plan, by all accounts, was actually to have him sort of come in and play a more background role, maybe get a few minutes, get used to sort of English football, and I mean, as an example of what sort of role he would play, the plan was to let Liam Gibbs out on loan if he did arrive. And, you see the sort of bit part role that Gibbs has played. We wouldn't have been seeing much from Varane, and he wouldn't have had much of an impact on this playoff push that Norwich are on at the moment, unless there were significant injuries sort of in the midfield department. But they've got Jakob Sorensen back now. Obviously, Gibbs didn't end up going out, so they have got him at the moment. So I don't think it's a situation that they're panicking about right now, but obviously he is a player that they like. They, by all accounts, have liked him for a really long time, and I would be surprised if they didn't end up going back in the summer. I would say probably the most likely situation in which they don't is only if they find somebody better. I don't think Gijón will be, with the amount of time that summer provides and probably the assessment that they'll be able to give Varane based on the season that he's had so far, I don't think they'll be playing the same level of hardball, and I think it might be easier for Norwich to do then. They'll also likely have a bit more money to play with, given we're probably expecting Jonathan Rowe to go in the summer as well. So it's going to be a completely different landscape by then. And, based on the fact that they did see him as a mid to longer term type player anyway, it would be surprising if their sort of interest waned. So definitely one to keep an eye on in the summer, and that's probably why there's not too much disappointment that it didn't get done this window.
Yeah, and a few points around this as well. Gijón obviously in their own promotion battle at the moment, trying to get back to La Liga in the Segunda Division. Varane hasn't played a minute in 2024. He's not someone that's been used kind of readily throughout this season. He's been more of a substitute. So I think even if Norwich City would have paid the money that Gijón wanted, which they were never going to do, but if that would have happened and he'd have arrived at Norwich City, I don't get the impression that he'd have been a player that would have come in and immediately impacted things. I think actually in reality, what it would have done is enabled Norwich City to send Liam Gibbs out a little bit earlier on loan and there was a host of championship interest in him as well. Obviously that didn't materialise, therefore he's stayed in. They don't lose from a numbers perspective. They're also losing Jakob Sorensen or could lose Jakob Sorensen in the summer if there's no kind of advancement on his contractual talks as well. So lots of kind of plates to spin, and you're right, clubs are more amenable to deals as a general rule of thumb in the summer, which I think kind of underscores the whole of this January conversation. Just a couple of kind of little bits around the transfer window as well. Let's believe Norwich missed out on a couple of targets in January, including one from South America. I don't know any more than that, I'm afraid. And that kind of underlines the point, really. They could only do really what the window allowed them to do. Obviously, we could talk about Adamida to Celtic. We did kind of cover him, not him going to Celtic per se, but him going to out on loan in the last podcast. So I'd go and rewatch that because I think a lot of the thoughts are still relevant, even though it's perhaps a little bit of a different club, but clearly a massive opportunity for him there. And on that front, Tony has said Eden needs to develop an aggressive side. Hopefully he's gone to the right place to learn. SVH is a gamble which we can afford to make. Wish him luck. And then Keith says, afternoon, Keith. I hope you're well. There is some actual football to talk about now. All of the transfer shenanigans are well and truly in the rearview mirror, which is always a lovely time of year. I always feel much fresher on the day after it. Well, maybe not the last one, to be fair, in the summer, but definitely this one when we got to bed a little bit earlier, thankfully, and weren't waiting for Hwang and Danny Bart to be announced, which I feel is going to be quite infamous as the years go on. Some football to speak about, Sam, and not just some football, an absolutely massive game for Norwich City at Carrow Road tomorrow. They welcome Mark Robins' Coventry to Norfolk. Really, really big game this, because Coventry missed an opportunity to extend their points gap to could have been at least a maximum of 5 if they'd have beaten Bristol City in midweek. They didn't. That ended as a draw, and so they come here with a 3-point gap to Norwich City. Obviously, I'm no wizard at maths, but you can work out there the potential rewards and potential pitfalls of this game if Norwich City win and lose it. Obviously, the points tally could be doubled if they lose it, and it could be made up if they win it. That is where we are. Do you get the sense? I've kind of had a feeling, certainly today, but maybe the last couple of days, and listening to David Wagner's press conference, that there is that feeling. There is kind of a desire, because usually you can hear managers try and downplay that a little bit. I didn't really get the sense that he did that yesterday. He's up for the test. He wants his Norwich City team to have games and occasions like this. And I guess the brutal reality is, if Norwich City do want to be a top 6 side in the Championship come May, these are, as they have done recently against Southampton and Hull and West Brom, and we can debate performances, but certainly in terms of results, if they want to end up in that top 6, then they need to produce results against these teams, don't they?
Yeah, definitely. I did find it interesting, actually, that sort of tack that you reference Wagner took in his press conference, and I wonder how much that was actually informed by the results that you mentioned against the sort of teams around them. Does he actually view it as a team that's now adept at getting results against sort of teams above them and in and around them, and good at performing in big games, and wanted to use that in the press conference and wanted to big it up because he felt actually that would get the best out of his players? I think that would have been, if that was the approach he was taking consciously, then that was a refreshing approach, actually, because so often you hear these sort of managers play things down and maybe fear the consequences of losing it. But I think he feels that they're in a good position now, that maybe they do actually thrive on that bigger game atmosphere based on their recent performances and recent results, and that actually at Carrow Road against opposition sort of in and around them, but also above them, they've got a decent record and they've got a decent chance of beating Coventry. I do think it's a different sort of game to the last couple of games in the last couple of weeks. You look at Leeds and Liverpool, and they are completely different tests to Coventry. As good as Coventry are, and to give them their due, they have been more consistently good than Norwich have this season, to be fair. They've had a pretty good season when you take into account the the start that they had and how much they've improved from there. But it's not quite Leeds and Liverpool away territory. We're looking more at the sort of, West Brom and Hull games where, yes, it was difficult, and yes, everyone knows they're performing well in the Championship, but these are the sorts of games that, as you said, if Norwich want to be qualifying for the playoffs, if they want to be in and around that promotion mix, they have to be probably at least getting something from, if not winning, really. So, yeah, it will definitely be interesting sort of to see what sort of approach Wagner takes to it. But it was refreshing actually to see him in that press conference talk about how big a game it is. And I haven't seen. I know you've done some quotes from Mark Robbins that are currently available to read, are they? Yeah, they are. Yeah, I've just seen them. But I'll have to give them a read afterwards. But yeah, I think it's for them. It's probably more a level of conservation and trying to keep that gap extended. And away at Carrow Road against a team that's still in relatively good form, when you take in sort of their results over the piece, I think Norwich have a sort of no fear factor that probably Coventry have, and that's the positive about being in the position they're in now, is that they're sort of always chasing, and they've got a little bit of a sense of nothing to lose. My only concern would be, and I was speaking to a fan outside Anfield actually, and asked them for the fan reaction what their sort of thoughts were on Norwich generally, and they highlighted the trend that they seem to get right up towards that playoff mix, and that's when they tend to drop off. So this is sort of the crunch game where they've got a decent chance to win. They're at home, they're in that playoff mix. This is the chance to actually make that leap and make the difference between challenging and sort of actually being in the mix and being a team that feels they could get into the top six. So yeah, as you say, absolutely huge game, probably bigger for Norwich than Coventry, but yeah, in any case, huge for both teams.
Agreed. It definitely feels like one that both teams won't or can't maybe lose, and maybe definitely more so in Norwich's case. I agree, because a 6-point gap. I know it's only a 2-game swing, and the Championship is so relentless, but it wouldn't be impossible. But it would certainly feel like a major dent in their playoff credentials, particularly given that the next home game is against Watford on Tuesday, Wednesday week. So the next 2 home games feel really important to actually their playoff campaign, and actually we could get the other side of Watford and things could look and feel massively different to how they do at this moment in time. I mean, you mentioned Coventry's run. It's 1 defeat in 16 in all competitions, and that came to some team in Suffolk. So that goes, and I think by all accounts, I've spoken to people who were at that game, I think not long after it, and they said that Coventry were pretty unfortunate not to get anything. I think they missed a penalty and hit the bar possibly, but I might be quoting the wrong game. So that goes to show that the form that they've been in. I mean, it's only 7 defeats for them this season as well, which, when you contrast that Norwich have been beaten on 12 occasions, that really illustrates just how well Mark Robbins has done this year. Lots of draws, and I think we saw in the reverse game that they've struggled a little bit with attacking productivity. But the return of Callum O'Hare, they've managed to find some form for the strikers that they spent money on in Hadji Wright and Ellis Sims as well. Those two have managed to find form a little bit, and actually you look at their away record this season, and it's the 8th best in the division. They've taken 18 points on the road, 5 wins, 3 draws, 6 defeats, 23 scored, 19 conceded. I mean, that illustrates just how difficult a test this is going to be. That's a much better record, for example, than West Brom, who came to Carrow Road last time out and were able to record a victory. So it does feel like this is going to be a tough, tight contest, Sam, doesn't it? And I guess for Norwich City, it's about finding those moments of individual quality, which, given how difficult we know they are to find, how big a blow is it that John Rowe is going to be missing for this weekend's game? Because he is a player that does and can and has produced those moments throughout the season for Norwich.
Yeah, that's a major blow. I think based on his performances recently, it might not mean, to be honest, too much in terms of their general level of performance. I don't think he's actually contributed as regularly or consistently as maybe Wagner hopes he will, sort of at some point, and how he has at some points in the season. But as you said, Norwich have been so based on moments this season, which, to be honest, it is a way to do it. I know it's not maybe the most consistent or reliable way, but it is a way that some teams find success. But then you put so much weight on having those players available, having them in form, and when he doesn't contribute something, more often than not, that's when Norwich end up losing or drawing games that they feel they should win. So yeah, without his presence, definitely the likelihood of those sort of moments happening definitely feels lower. But I suppose he'd say, you look at Liverpool, they've scored one from a set piece against the team that's top of the Premier League. They've had one player score from 25 yards. So they do have players capable of producing those moments. Borja Sainz is definitely one of those. Gabriel Sara hasn't really been in form, but he is one of those as well, and has started to contribute a couple of assists and goals in recent games, even if his performance levels haven't sort of been up to it. So they do have players that can probably contribute those moments, even if they're less common than they have been from Rowe. So I suppose his message will be for those players to step up and to prove that they actually can play those roles and that they can star like Rowe has at times. But I think, you look at the sort of the low margin way that Coventry have maybe picked up points this season, and it's actually quite similar to how Norwich are trying to do it. So although, it feels like a tight, tense game, maybe might get the crowd a little bit anxious, it leaves Norwich's hopes in every game a little bit in the balance. That was what Wagner has sort of spoken about creating earlier on in the season. It was such large margins at the start of the season that they were drawing 4-4 with Southampton. They were losing 6-2 to Plymouth. Yes, they were beating some teams comprehensively, but there wasn't really that consistency. And I think Wagner wanted to close up that level in terms of the margins and how easy it is to win those games. So he's spoken about it, so they are starting to achieve that. I wonder how close this game with Coventry will be, given they've sort of been achieving that ever since they managed to start turning around that poor form at the start of the season. And that game at the CBS earlier in the season was an example of that. Not too many chances really created, not much excitement, to be honest, throughout that game, but both teams managed to find goals. And then it ends 1-1 with, as I spoke about, very, very low margins. So it will be a tight game. It's probably the sort of game that both teams have geared themselves to create at this point in the season. And yeah, I think it could be that moment of quality that decides it if one of them wins it. And, they have got the players that you sort of mentioned. Callum O'Hare, Sakamoto has been a really key player for them this season as well. And they like to sort of attack through wide areas. So he certainly is going to be a key one in this. And not having Rowe when the game seems to be really likely to be finely balanced on those moments is a major blow. But Sainz showed he could do it at Anfield against, I think it was Van Dijk trying to win the ball off him, and then Alisson in goal when he hit it. So if he can do that, then he can do it against Coventry. It's just about finding that consistency and for a lot of those key players, finding that ability to produce those moments.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Sam for his prediction in a moment. Of course, you guys can put in your early predictions as well. We do this on the team news video as well, which will be in about 24 hours time, give or take as well. So we'll be able to hear from. I'll put money on. So I'll say this now because he's not here and probably won't watch it. But put money on a Paddy Davitt draw for tomorrow. That's the way that he's going to go firmly on the fence, I suspect. But here's some numbers. I mean, we've just spoken about John Rowe. He scored 5 of Norwich's last 10 championship goals. Obviously 12 this season, which is twice as many as any other Norwich player. Adam Ida, who has just gone out on loan to Celtic, being the second top goal scorer. But actually, Norwich have enjoyed a pretty decent recent record against Coventry. Unbeaten in their last 7 league games against Cov, 2-1 defeat back in February 2009 at Carrow Road, the last time that they beat Norwich. And actually, their record at Carrow Road, and that leans into what Mark Robbins has spoke about this morning in his, or whenever he conducted his pre-match press conference, what he's spoken about. They've only won at Carrow Road twice since January 1989 in the league. There was an FA Cup win in 99, I think, as well. And Norwich are in pretty decent nick at home as well. And on Robbins, still yet to record a single win against Norwich City as a manager. 6 attempts, no wins. I think he's taken 2 points, which was one of those came in the draw, and I think conceded 17 goals or something ridiculous like that. So he's not enjoyed a particularly prosperous record against Norwich City either. Whether these things actually mean anything, it's entirely up to you to debate. But hopefully that errs on the side of your positive conscience ahead of tomorrow's game. We shall see. Sam, I think we've alluded to it being a tight contest. How do you see it? How do you see it going? What's your score prediction? And yeah, just give us an idea of, in your head, how you're picturing the game.
I am picturing it as a very close one. I think, yeah, individual moments might even be sort of decided late on when players have started to tire. But as you said, sort of Norwich have improved quite a lot at home. They're in a decent run of form at Carrow Road, and it doesn't seem that Mark Robin's teams are especially good at getting results against obviously his former club. So yeah, I think taking all those factors into consideration and sprinkling in probably a little bit of positivity gained from the new signing last night, I feel like I'm going to go with a 2-1 Norwich win. This is the sort of game, to be fair to them, that in recent weeks, in the last couple of months, small margins at home against teams in and around them, they're the sorts of games you want to be winning. And to be fair to Wagner and his players, those are the sorts of games they have been winning in recent weeks. So I'm not sure how entertaining it's going to be as a sort of a spectacle, but yeah, I think I'm gonna err on the side of positivity and optimism and go for a 2-1 Norwich win. What about you?
Yeah, I feel this is going to be a one famous last words. It'll be 4-4 now, but I think it'll be decided by a goal either way. So I could see anything from 1-0 Norwich, 1-0 Cov, 2-1 Norwich, 2-1 Cov, or I could see a 1-1 draw. That's basically what I can see. Any of those 5-6 results, anywhere in that. So I'm going to go for 1-0 Norwich and err on the side of optimism as well, and help them push their playoff cause a little bit further. Maybe that's sort of taken into account the Coventry's recent record, which, we know these things don't mean very much, but often they exist for a reason, and they can become a little bit of a hoodoo for supporters. I think Cov are bringing down a fair amount of them. So it's going to be interesting. That seems like a really apt place to leave the show. Thank you very much for watching, whether you've been watching on Facebook, YouTube, X, or whether you're watching on demand as well on YouTube. Leave a like, subscribe, all of that good stuff. We'll have all of your usual match day content and coverage on Saturday at Carrow Road for Norwich City's game against Coventry. It's a big one. See you then. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your Fridays, and we will see you very soon.